Good morning to friends in the UK and EU regions, and also good evening to friends in Asian region. On behalf of the Global Governance Institution, a warm welcome to both our speakers and audiences. I'm retired Captain Andy Tian, the founder and the president of the newly established think tank, Global Governance Institution. Please do not check it on the internet now. We are still trying to set up the official website. It will be on the line maybe in 1 week. Thanks for joining us today for this special event on genocide in international law. Given the rising numbers of allegations of genocide in recent years, for instances in Sudan, Burma, Iraq, China, and as well, the sharply different opinions either for or against those allegations. It is more than timely to convene this international experts dialogue on genocide in international law as one of the kicking events of our GGI-JS international law dialogue between China and the world series. What are the difficulties and challenges for the application of the rules of international law on genocide? To what extent has the law and politics intervened to shape the application of genocide in international law? Does an expanding use of the law really serve the purpose of establishing genocide in international law? To answer those and other framing questions I have raised in the invitation, we are joined in honor today by a great group of serious scholars. They are Professor William Shabas. He's a professor of international law at Middlesex University, and as well the leading universities, the National University of Ireland, Galway. Actually, the list of the titles, his titles are so long, I will just stop here. And Admiral Professor Jayanas Columbage. He has PhDs, Master of Science, Masters, and many titles also, and also as a linkage to China, a guest professor of Sichuan University. He also served as the Director General of Institute of National Security in Sri Lanka. And also we have speakers, Victor Gao. Victor Gao is the chair professor of Suzhou University. He's also vice president of the Center for China and Globalization. And Mr. Sten Wachriven, professor of international at the Xinjiang University College. Professor Sten has been a frequent judge for the ICC and IHL moot courts in recent years. We met on many occasions. And also Dr. Wang Jiang, he's a distinguished research fellow at the Institute for Frontier Region of China, Zhejiang Normal University. And Dr. Lei Xue, he's a research fellow for the Institute for World Economic Studies at the Institute for International Studies. And Ms. Yuqing Liu, she's a defense legal assistant before international criminal courts and tribunals. Last but not least, Professor Shiping Liao. He's the director of the Center for International Dispute Settlements in our think tank, and also professor of international law at Beijing Normal University. He will chair the second session of the event. We did want to see open debate among experts holding different opinions and try to reach out to experts such as experts in Geoffrey Lee's team, who is attending the Uyghur Tribunal. Unfortunately, we did not get any responses. And finally, today we get a large group of audiences coming from different parts of the world. Welcome you all. Without further delay, let me open the first session by inviting Professor William Shabas to give his opinion. Each speaker is expected to make a presentation of around 8 minutes, followed by moderated discussions, which I may invite audiences to ask questions. Professor William Shabas, please, the floor is yours.
Let me start by defining genocide. Of course, the term comes from the Genocide Convention of 1948. The period that followed the Second World War was a period of great judicial creativity, and several categories of international crime were then launched, were defined, including genocide. The definitions of that reflected the time when they were adopted, and so they were all quite narrow in scope. The war crimes, for example, were confined to conflicts of an international nature. Crimes against humanity were restricted to acts carried out in association with an armed conflict. And genocide had the narrow definition of the convention that listed a series of acts, but it required that they be done with the intent to destroy the group. And the list of groups was also limited to national, ethnic, racial, or religious groups. Over time, international law has gone through great development and great expansion. One of the paradoxes is that in the 1990s, when the other categories of international criminal law, war crimes and crimes against humanity, went through a radical, a revolutionary development and a huge expansion, the drafters of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court resisted any pressure to enlarge the narrow definition of genocide. And that spirit has been reflected since then in the case law of international courts and tribunals, particularly the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia and the International Court of Justice. In the public conscience, the notion of genocide is much broader than it is in international law, so that the term is often used in circumstances, political, journalistic, activist circumstances, when it does not correspond to the legal definition. I think that probably the most misunderstood aspect of the legal definition concerns the requirement of genocidal intent. So people look at the definition of genocide with the 5 punishable acts: killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. We have more recently interest in measures preventing births within the group and forcibly transferring children. These are all acts of genocide, and often people identify those acts and say, well, that's genocide. Those are genocidal acts. But they're only genocidal acts if they're conducted with the intent to destroy the group. And the international tribunals have been very clear that the destruction must be the physical destruction. And so we can look at an act like, for example, measures that prevent birth. There are many measures that can prevent birth. A 2-child policy or a 3-child policy is a measure that prevents birth. A law on monogamy prevents birth. A law preventing marriage of of children, of people under the age of 18, will prevent birth. And there are people out there on the internet and activists and lawyers who say, when they encounter this, they say that's a proof of genocide. But it's only a proof of genocide when the act is conducted with the intent to destroy the group physically. So we see many allegations of genocide where these conditions are simply not met. I think the other aspect of the intentional element that is poorly understood, or not always understood, or perhaps simply ignored, is that in proving a case of genocide, the proof must be of a very high level. It must be of a level, even if we're not in a criminal court, at a level that is similar to the criminal standard of evidence, which is beyond reasonable doubt, a very high standard of certainty. And what that means in practice is that if there are other explanations for the acts, in the absence of direct evidence of intent, you cannot conclude that this is a case of genocide. It's a proposition, it's a theory, but it has no chance of succeeding in court because when you base evidence on inferences, on conduct, rather than on direct evidence, like statements, like reports, like decisions, when it's simply concluding on the basis of a conduct of a country, of a group of individuals, you have to be able to exclude all of the other explanations. In the most recent case, the International Court of Justice dealt with, which was the case of Croatia versus Serbia. The judgment was issued in 2015, and I was a lawyer in that case for Serbia. And in that judgment, the judges point to the level of killings, which was, there were many thousands of killings that Croatia alleged, and the judges said, this is not enough. And the reason was that because, and this is where the number of victims becomes so important, is that when you are alleging genocide, if the number of people who are actually physically destroyed, the number of killings is not very high, it's very difficult to eliminate other theories and other explanations for why the deaths or the killings take place.
Thank you. This is Victor Gao. I'm based in Beijing. It is a great pleasure to attend this very important discussion. I think I agree with the professor who made excellent remarks about the legal definition of genocide, the required elements, and how they mismatch with the realities on the ground in Xinjiang, for example. The point I want to make is that it's very obvious that the United States and several other Western countries may not want to bring a real case of law in the court against China about genocide. I think they want to weaponize it, as the professor correctly said it, and try to confuse the world's perception of what's happening in Xinjiang by using or misusing the term genocide and create the impression of genocide existing in Xinjiang, regardless of whether there are sufficient evidences being produced and being verified in the court. I think in that case, this is actually very dangerous, especially because the United States now views China as an enemy or as a competitor, and they want to find excuses where they can achieve their goal of holding China down. And I think using this genocide term as a weapon against China is probably, from the US perspective, a very convenient way to do this. Now, I studied law in the United States. I actually spent some time looking at the US wars against the native Indians. Every time when the United States would launch a major war campaign against the American Indians, they would issue announcements and proclamations about how evil the American Indians were, raping the white ladies and killing the white babies, for example. And then they march to exterminate the American Indians. Now, the American way of dealing with the American Indians is truly a genocide. And I think we need to fully acknowledge that. And I think the American way of using the term genocide against China is to create this warmongering attitude against China and mislead as many people or as many countries as possible that if they want to launch a war against China or launch a major confrontation against China, they operate under the banner of anti-genocide in China. This is truly a very dangerous situation. Now, on the other hand, if we look at Xinjiang in particular, there is no doubt that radicalization has happened in Xinjiang. I have called it a direct spillover of the 20-year war in Afghanistan launched by the United States and NATO countries. And the spillover is particularly serious in Pakistan on the one hand, and China's Xinjiang region on the other hand. So in a sense, many of the problems which have happened in Xinjiang, especially involving our Uyghur brothers and sisters, could actually be explained by analyzing the increasing level of radicalization involving terrorism, extremism, and separatism in Xinjiang, rather than, for example, using the misnomer or the complete misrepresentation of genocide. Now, another thing I want to venture out for your discussion is that if we really very much focus on the discussion of genocide, we actually fall into the trap laid by the United States, actually, because there is no genocide. As the professor mentioned, if we look at the number of people, there is no reduction of the number. The Uyghur people have more than doubled ever since 1950, and in recent years, the increase in the population has been steady. And the increase of the Uyghur population has been higher than the increase of other minorities in Xinjiang, and has been much higher than the national average in Xinjiang. Now, if we shift the focus to genocide, or whether there is genocide or not, then I think we fall into this trap, because I think China may be in a position of not be able to defend itself. Why? Because what the US has created is not a legal case in a court. They are really presenting this as already established situation in front of mankind, or in front of the Western countries in particular, try to raise this fanfare against China by using genocide as a weapon against China. Therefore, in this connection, may I also suggest that while it is very important for all of us to further analyze and define the exact meanings of genocide, whether it applies to Xinjiang in particular, for example, we also need to go one step further. That is, we want to go inside the real heart of the United States, why they use genocide, which is legally, truly indefensible. And they cannot win if there is a case in a court. But why they still want to keep talking about it, why they want to mobilize other countries in the West, try to pin China down about genocide. I think we should come up with an indices of information about the growth of the population, for example, the level of radicalization, and the number of terrorist attacks, the number of innocent people who have been killed and wounded in these terrible terrorist attacks in Xinjiang over the years, and shift the focus to the realities on the ground in Xinjiang. Now, I said this because I think talking about genocide is probably one of the most serious things you can talk about between countries. I always say the real accusation of a country guilty of genocide is tantamount to declaration of war by one country against the other, because this is truly the most serious crimes you can imagine involving any country or any nation or any civilization. And this is completely not true if we compare the situation in Xinjiang. So I think while I'm very eager to learn from all of you about how you think about genocide, I'm also a little bit traumatized, because I'm very much aware that the United States decision makers have laid a trap for China to fall into, and we need to be aware of genocide as genocide, but also genocide, or the accusation of genocide, as a trap. And we need to be fully aware of these two different things. And I think the United States is more driving for using genocide as a trap for China to fall into. Thank you very much.
Okay, good evening, everybody. It's nice to be with you. And thank you for Professor William and Professor Victor, brilliant insight to the topic. I was worried at the end that I may not have anything to add because they were doing so great work. Now, we heard that the term genocide, and I think it's a hugely misused term in international domain. I mean, we heard the word weaponization, and I would add like it is politicization and weaponization of the term genocide. And Sri Lanka is suffering from this term or the accusation like China. And of course, it has an emotive nature because when you say genocide, it gives a bit of a bad feeling like Holocaust. I mean, it's millions of people killed. I mean, I think the Professor William mentioned about one person getting killed and accusing as genocide, but it has a very emotive. So the victim or the suppressor or the aggressor in the beginning, and then once he is defeated, this is one weapon he used. Oh, we were genocide. There is genocide by the government forces, and we were the victim. It's very easy to say that. So it is very emotive, and it has a very politically sensitive terminology. So this is something I think we need to understand, and we need to understand that the Western countries are capitalizing on this sensitive political emotive nature of the term genocide. Now, if it is real genocide, it has to have, I mean, real, sincerely political, legal implication. But we all know, if you look at the history of cases against genocide, only very few we have in the world, right? Now, therefore, when you, I mean, the Professor William also mentioned the intent. Now, again, I would like to add, because the unspecified nature or the difficulty in identifying the intent again is used to accuse countries of genocide, because you can easily say you have committed genocide. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to, I mean, the accuser doesn't have to prove anything. Simply say you have carried out genocide. I mean, as Professor said, we have to have two components: genocide, that is the intent, and the physical thing. Now, this is, therefore, it is a factually very legal complex issue. The genocide is a very complex legal issue. Now, therefore, we need very detailed and careful study about the term applicability. How does it set in the international system? Who is using the term genocide against whom? Now, when you dig in the past, there are many cases we can unsurface, right? And there would have been cases of genocide, but nothing really happened. Now, again, the genocide, the real sense is giving state responsibility and at times individual responsibility. Now, this is again, we call it the command intent or the commander's intention according to the international humanitarian law. This is again difficult to prove. So this is also giving an advantage to the accuser. Oh, it is easy to say you are responsible, your state is responsible of carrying out genocide. Now we need to, I think everybody will agree, we need a competent international court to say a crime of genocide has happened or not. If that has not happened, please stop using the term genocide. This is what I want to really say. Now, in that sense, it has to be a competent court internationally, or it has to be a competent court domestically, or it has to be an international penal tribunal. Now, the Professor William mentioned that he was part of it. Without that, no one should be able to say this is genocide, right? Even the, I mean, when you look at the United Nations Human Rights Council, well, they can appoint independent commission, I mean, the rapporteurs, but they cannot determine a case of genocide has actually happened. So this is, I think, very important, that who can declare that there is a case of genocide. Now, again, coming back to the mental element, that is the intent. How do you really define the intent? How do you really define the intent of during a terrorist case, right? Low intensity or violent armed conflict. How do you really define? What is the intent of the leader of that country? Now, the leader of that country is expected to protect its people. Now, people throw human rights at you, but people forget the right to life. Right now, in the case of China, I believe in the case of Sri Lanka, what the government has done is have actually given the right to life to the people. To enjoy human rights, you first should live. right? Now, in the case of Sri Lanka, we have suffered about 100,000 deaths from all sides. And that's lives lost in this country. So there is, Professor mentioned the 5 cases of the 5 cases of the genocide, 5 crimes of genocide. Here again, it is again used as a weapon because killing the members of a group. What is the number? Is it 1 genocide, 100,000 or 1 million? What is the number that you can talk for genocide? So I will not go into that detail because the Professor William already spoke about it. But we know that there are basically 4 groups that the Genocide Act bill is protecting: the national group, ethnical group, racial group, and religious group. Even this one in this contemporary world is very difficult to define because these are quite mixed. Take the case of Sri Lanka. It is very difficult to say you belong to this ethnicity, you belong to this religion, because we have so much of intermarriages. People are living in harmony. People are living in a multicultural, multi-ethnic society. So how do you really identify? Very briefly, I'll give you an example. Now, the Tamils in Sri Lanka was fighting for a separate state in north and the east. But more Tamils are living outside these 2 areas than their own claim area. So this is the predicament of that. Now, very briefly, with my experience as a practitioner of 36 years of going through a very difficult conflict, and also with my limited exposure to Xinjiang province, let me quickly compare the 2 in the final way. Both, we had separatist group demanding a separate state, whether it is in Xinjiang, whether it is in Sri Lanka. And they use indiscriminate use of extreme violence. They didn't care who will get killed. They wanted the political ideology. And then there was a complete breakdown of law and order. And then both the groups enjoyed financial, psychological, and material support from other countries, not only the own people, other countries. And they have terrorized the region, they disturbed civilian life, and they targeted unmanned, innocent civilians. Now, the government had to protect the lives of people. As I mentioned, right to life is more important for a government than protecting human rights, because you have to have people living first. Now, government had to stop terrorism, whether it is Xinjiang or Sri Lanka. Government had no choice but to stop terrorism. They tried different ways. I don't know exactly the process taken place in Xinjiang through peace negotiation, ceasefire, but in Sri Lankan case, I know there were a large number of ceasefire, peace agreement, but nothing worked. Every time we had an agreement, the terrorist group became stronger, more violent, and it resulted in more death. Terrorism was used as a weapon to achieve the political agendas of both the separatist group. The government had no choice but to use military force to suppress terrorism. Now, it was not only the military force, but a combination of law enforcement, combination of social work, and also vocational training. These are, again, 2 similar things between Xinjiang and Sri Lanka. Now, having implemented these issues, what do we have? We have improved situation in the local area. The security is assured. Income has risen. Unemployment dropped. Violence eradicated. So what is the problem? What is the problem? Why do you keep accusing us of genocide? There was no genocide, and now we have real peace. We have stability, right? And also the development and the economic empowerment is taking place. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, I would say the West is really misusing the term of genocide, and because that is a very easy thing to do, because it is not 100% defined. It is a very, I call it a loose word, in the sense, because how do you really define various aspects of genocide? But they are using this against countries when it suits them, because human right is another weapon they use, and the genocide is a very strong tool to condemn countries, point fingers at countries, right? You don't have to have a case. As Professor William said, if there is a case, they will lose. But then you keep accusing. There is a saying, if a lie is told 1,000 times, people begin to believe, oh, that's true. And in the new age of social media, a lie is told. Once a lie is told, it takes a lot of efforts to prove that it is a lie. right? So these are all coming from my practitioner point of view. I'm not a law professor by any means, and I am here among the expert, right? Now, by accusing the governments who actually control terrorism in genocide, you are basically glorifying terrorism. You are glorifying violence. You are inciting violence. It gives a very wrong message. You use terrorism, and after 10 years, you are the good guy. The government who fought terrorism is the bad guy. So this is what is happening. So therefore, I think we really need to be discussing about it. We need to be sharing our thoughts about it. You know, even we are accused of mass killing. I mean, I mentioned only 100,000 people killed in 30 years, right? So that's not mass killing by any means. Yeah. So then, then there is no concentration camp. We never had, and I don't believe China, you have it as well. But then it is easy to say, oh, you have concentration camp. You are eliminating a minority. These are easy things to say. But then another thing is the United Nations Human Rights Council is used, abused, and misused by these powers to accuse the countries that they don't like, the countries that which does not bow down to them. So this is another thing. So as I said, by doing this, finally, what these Western powers are doing is glorifying terrorism, glorifying violence, because they are condemning the governments which were compelled to fight because of the mandate given by the people to the government in order to protect the citizenry. So this is my final word is this is real double standards, and this is real hypocrisy at its best. So we need to discuss this in every forum, and we need to throw this case back at the accuser. Thank you.
And especially thanks for Andy to organize such wonderful event, so we can share the opinion here. So very briefly, I'm actually came from Xinjiang. I'm born and raised in Xinjiang before I go to UK to study. And also my research area focusing on the international security and also the counterterrorism policy. And also because I think in the audience, there are many questions about Xinjiang. So I'm not going to repeat what you guys already said, because you guys already talk about the genocide in the term of the definition and in the term of the practice quite a lot. I'm here to share some of my experience and some of my thought with you guys. So first of all, in my opinion, I think when we talk about so-called genocide in Xinjiang, I think for foreigners outside China, not only the scholar, but also the media and the government, when they look at Xinjiang, there's a problem, is a lack of the first-hand material to research or to know what really happened in Xinjiang. And to follow the international or Western media, we can find this so-called evidence sometimes based on the unreliable individual statement. Some people offer very bizarre story to try to testify. And some of the evidence are so-called satellite images, which widely used by the media, such as the BBC. But very fast, the Chinese media and the Chinese officials declare that just a false read. So in the term of the law, in the legal science, as you guys talked before, I think all of that are really hard to reach the so-called evidence level, evidence standard. And many audience are from the media background. So in the term of the news and the media, I think it is really hard to say that some of the reports did serious fact check. So in the term of the intelligence, I think many of that I could be called as bad intelligence, such as it's just the same as if we look at Iraq and some of the bad intelligence which leading the some country invading Iraq caused a serious consequence. In the term of the academic, I think probably I can say all of that are from secondhand materials. I think many of you teach a student, if one of the, well, I don't know, postgraduate students present an essay on all of the secondhand materials, you'll probably give him or her a fail. So it's really hard to say they reach a certain level of the academic level. And for the Western, I think it is should be more casual on these very sensitive questions. It's very, I think a major problem is here. Some of the Chinese information, some of the information from China are not taken seriously by Western people, not only the media, but also the scholars. Such as if we're talking about genocide today, some of the Chinese side will know the Professor Li Xiaoxia, who's from Xinjiang, and she's read a research report on the population changes in Xinjiang. But that kind of information is never taken seriously by the Western people, because she from China and she is Han Chinese. So some people just jump to the conclusion, wow, it's another Chinese propaganda, but actually it's not. When we're looking at the research or the scholars from Xinjiang, I think we always need to treasure that. They did all those work in a very sensitive way. So I think some of the opinions are very important. So if I would give the Chinese government some of the advice, I think they still need to try to keep the transparency here. And as all of you may know, some of the country's government officials or media has been invited to Xinjiang and to visit the place, to experience place. But many Western countries have a little problem with here. And also because of pandemic, so those kind of work, I think, has been delayed. So I hope the Chinese government keeps the transparency here and continue to do such work to share the information. And secondly, so I would say how the Western perspectives are formed. I was talking to a US scholar, a scholar from America, and he gave me a quite interesting answer to that. Is that the policy or the whole idea about what happened in Xinjiang are actually the result of some of these NGOs, some of the individual third parties are actually lobbying to the US government, Congress, or parliaments in Western countries. So during that process, these lobbyings actually create sense of the political correctness. So many people, including the politicians and also some of the party organizations, they are actually being hijacked, I think, by those kind of political correctness. Otherwise, it is really hard to explain when we're talking about some of the big companies such as Nike and Coca-Cola, and they try to actually lobby the US government and the US parliament to release some of the acts, and try to get a better condition or better deals here. And thirdly, if we're talking about people talking about the intention here, if you try to prove there is a genocide, what is your intention? So what is really the intention by the Chinese government or the Chinese side? I think some of the scholars just mentioned before is based on the security reason. So some of the Western scholars, US scholars, try to describe that what happened in Xinjiang is nothing about terrorism. It's only the conflict between the different ethnics. And he even mentioned that, well, if we're talking about counterterrorism issues, in the last 10 years, well, Xinjiang do have terrorism issues, but only 3 or 5 cases are linked to the terrorism issues. But if that is the case, then we have difficulty to explain why so many Uyghurs ending up in Pakistan, Afghanistan, and even Syria to join the local terrorism group and to join a so-called global jihad. And so what China do here is not only maintain the security situation in Xinjiang, try to protect its own citizens and try to protect Xinjiang, try to protect even the Uyghur people, but also China did a lot to protect the region security and even the global security. Because some of the case, when I do my studies, some of the suspects even mentioned they try to go abroad. It's nothing to do with Xinjiang. It's nothing to do with China. They try to go to Afghanistan and try to go to Syria to kill American and UK soldiers, to try to invade. And finally, I would like to say, with regarding of the counterterrorism and well, whatever you say is insurgency or national security issues, we always facing the challenges to balance the security issues and also the human rights challenges. To be honest, the counterterrorism issue is a dirty job for all of the country and not protecting anything here. So for all the country, I think we all have the room to do a better works. I think in the media we see quite a lot like what about this? You point finger to me, I point finger to you, but it's not going to leading anywhere, I think. So I'm looking forward to more conversations and also more dialogues, just like today's. I think it's even more meaningful. Thank you all.
It's enough this evening for him. We do want to be on time, but we are already over time. It shows that this topic is really needs to be discussed for more occasions. And many thanks for our speakers and audiences, in particular, Admiral Jayanas is 2 hours behind China. Thank you. The discussion is a professional, informative, and insightful. I really learned a lot from our experts. Before I conclude the meeting, I think I have 2 points to share with you. First, although as the British international law professor Shaw said in his textbook that law and politics cannot be divorced, they are engaged in a crucial symbiotic relationship. It does neither discipline a service to minimize the significance of the other. Still, it is the obligation of our international lawyer to fight against double standards and the weaponizing and the politicizing of international law. And second, whether lawyer or not, we should try to resist the quirky arguments. Atrocities in other countries do not make excuse for you to commit violations of international law in your country. That being said, since we know it is a truth that there is no genocide in Xinjiang, China, I suggest the Chinese scholars should be cautious in making too quirky arguments. We are totally different from those countries where there were real atrocities. I very much want to invite our speakers to Xinjiang to see the truth with their own eyes, because we as lawyers should make any justification based only on law and facts. I also want to invite those lawyers who take different opinions, because most of them have never been to Xinjiang. Hope next time we could have one of them to join us on further dialogues. Thank you all, and see you next time in our next virtual event under our GGI-JS International Law Dialogue between China and the World series. Hope to see you soon in person also when the pandemic allows. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
再见。